quick chat. At the County of San Diego without a microphone. Hi there, Ray. And Yan Liu from Contra Costa Water District. Thank you. Is there anybody else on the phone audio?
Hi there.
Yeah, we have some more CDFW folks in a conference room.
Okay, great.
And Keenan Smith, State Water Board.
Okay.
Rankin Holmes, Watercourse Engineering.
And Stephen Rano, US EPA.
Do you have anybody else on the phone?
Hi, this is Joel Osuna, project manager from the Center for Geospatial Science and Technology out of CSU Northridge.
Hi there. Okay, great. If that's everybody, I'm delighted with the turnout we have. We'll just give it maybe one more minute before I get started.
Yeah, Belle, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Belize Lane. I'm at Utah State University, and I'm working with Sam Sandoval at UC Davis on this project. And we have our student Noelle Patterson, who's really been the lead on developing this environmental flows website for California. And I'm also excited about the turnout, glad folks are here, and looking forward to giving you guys some more information about this website and tools that we've developed and answer any questions you may have. And it's definitely been an iterative process. We've really appreciated the feedback we've gotten thus far from our different project partners and different folks who've been starting to apply these tools and give us feedback on how it can be more useful to everyone. So I'm really glad everyone's here. And I'm now assistant professor at Utah State in hydrology out here.
Yeah. Will, do you want to introduce yourself?
In the room here, we have Will Anderson, State Water Board.
Samuel Cole, State Water Board.
Yep.
Oh, hi.
And also here in the room is Sam Sandoval, faculty extension specialist. I working with my co-PI Bell on this project.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks. And this is Noelle Patterson. Can everybody see the first slide of my presentation?
Yep.
Okay, yes. FFC Under the Hood tutorial.
Noelle,
And
can you expand your screen somehow?
let's see if I can. What I see when I look at it is just the landscape view of the first slide. And on my computer, I have the slide show with the notes. What do you see?
I see 3/4 of the way full page with some strange white space, but maybe that's just on my end.
That's what I see too.
Yeah.
Okay, let me go into my settings really quick. And let me know, is that better? Is there any change so far?
Now we can see your notes and
Oh, you can.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the next slide.
Okay. I was just playing around with changing the preferences with my screen share.
yeah. If not, it's too bad. It's not too bad. We can still see the screen okay.
Okay. I'll try one more thing and then I'll just maybe keep
we'll carry on.
everything. I won't expand any windows to the full extent if that might help.
What's orange?
I don't think that will do it. Okay, so there's no change, right? But maybe if I just pull in this window, does that then show everything on the eFlows website?
Uh-huh.
Okay, so I'll just make sure to keep all of my windows minimized just a little bit.
That website you can open fully and we can see it.
It's only the PowerPoint
I guess so.
that doesn't show? Okay.
That's fine. That's fine.
Maybe that's enough that we can at least get started then.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I'll just keep it open like this. All right, so thank you everybody for coming. This presentation webinar on the functional flows calculator is a follow-up from some previous presentations we've given about the functional flows theory behind the California Environmental Flows Framework project. And so in this presentation, I'm showing more how to use the functional flows calculator through our interactive website tool, and with a particular emphasis on how to use it with your own data. And so I have a planned presentation, but I invite you to stop and ask me if you have questions about the steps I'm doing along the way, or have extra features you'd like me to look into a little more while I give the presentation or at the end. So with that, the general outline is I'll first show you some of the resources we have available online to get you started with the functional flows calculator. I'll show running the FFC through the website tool. Then we'll go briefly into using the code and running the FFC through Python. And actually along the way, I'll be showing parameter assignment and how you can adjust the FFC to your own needs. So starting with some resource links, there's first, of course, the eFlows website, where you can find all of the results of the FFC analysis available for California. And we've been adding more and more functionality for working with your own data through the website. There's 2 pages of documentation that I'll point out. One has documentation specifically related to the website and all the content available on it, and one that's more geared at the metrics of the FFC and how exactly those are calculated, including code snippets. And the last link is the code repository. So this is where all of the code for the FFC is available online, where you can download it. So I'll start by going straight to the eFlows website, and from there I'll show how you can navigate to these 2 documentation pages. So I've got an internet browser open. Can everybody online see the full extent of this web page?
Yes, you can open it fully, I think.
Oh, okay. Maybe that problem was just with
it's just that presentation.
Oh, okay.
PowerPoint.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
That's great to hear.
Thanks.
Okay, so I'm putting in eflows.ucdavis.edu. I have my profile in here, so it took me right to my profile page. But otherwise, this is what the landing page will look like. And although there's a couple other components to the website, we'll be focusing entirely on the hydrology part of the website. I'll just give a brief overview of the website. One feature that we have to help you get started are these question mark bubbles in the bottom corner of the pages. And these show you sort of a tutorial through the website of some of the features, map layers. Here it is, the general display. And so we have this guide of the website on a few different pages, so that can help you get acquainted. And as it showed here on the left panel of the website, we have a map of California color-coded to the 9 hydrologic classes that we use in the FFC analysis. And the dots on the map are the 223 reference gauges that we used for the reference condition FFC analysis. And all the information for those 223 reference gauges is also in these drop-down menus on the right side of the screen, split up by hydrologic class. And so if you're interested in reference conditions in California, you can look at either a class-wide dimensionless reference hydrograph. So this is a hydrograph showing the general patterns of stream flow across a given year. Or we can go back and look at individual gauges. And so here's a dimensionless reference hydrograph just for a single gauge. You can also go in for any individual gauge and look at flow from a year-by-year perspective. And this, again, is for reference gauges. So these years are generally going to be unimpaired years. And here in the top right, it's showing the water year type, whether it's dry or moderate or wet. And for all of our reference stream flow gauges, we've calculated functional flow metrics. I'll describe these a little more in detail in just a moment, but you can do overlays of metrics that we've calculated for each water year in our reference stream flow. So that's a very quick overview of the eFlows website. There's a lot more that you can go into, and you can use, again, these little tour guide help bubbles to get acquainted. But now I'm going to go back and show how to look at the documentation, because this is a good first step for learning more about the website. So you'll go to this How Does It Work link, either How Does It Work, or I provided the links in the presentation. And so this gives an overview of all the information we have on the eFlows website, including the stream classification with the 9 hydrologic classes for California, some information on the dimensionless reference hydrographs and how these are calculated either for a given stream class or for an individual stream. And we have box plot representations of the functional flow metrics, and those are aggregated by stream class on the website. So we have some information about those. Here's an overlay of a stream class with the range of metric values overlaid on top. And so we have just some information about the different visualizations that we have. And then here with the functional flow metrics, we have a brief description of all of the metrics that we calculate for each reference year of a given stream. And here at the top of this page, I'll show you the link for going more into the detailed metrics documentation. So this is the FFC documentation. This opens up a new web page where here we have some information in detail for each of the functional flow metrics and how they're calculated. So for example, I'm in spring recession timing. There's a brief description, and then the steps for calculation are laid out one at a time, including the code snippets. So this is how we go through Python and calculate this given metric. You see there's quite a few steps in here, but this is the way to lay it out. So if you really wanted to get into the code and the calculation, you can come here. Okay, let's go back to the presentation briefly. And now I'll show first a tutorial on how to use the FFC through the website with your own data. And since the last time I gave this webinar, we've had a lot of improvements to this feature that I can share. So the first step is to create a user profile. And you saw the one that I already created. It just takes a name and an email. Then you upload your flow data. I'll cover the format we require for that. And then I'll show how you can explore the results outputs through downloaded outputs and data visualizations that are shown right on the website. So let's go back to eFlows. Here I have my user profile. I think I just created this yesterday for this example. And like I said, it just takes a minute with your name and your email. And here's where you upload your time series data. I have a couple that I created yesterday for practice, but I will show you again all the steps to go through that. And so we have some text here showing the requirements. It takes in a CSV file with 2 columns, and they require the exact format, month, day, and a 4-digit year, and a flow column with CFS and cubic feet per second as the flow measurement. And the columns must have the header dates and flow, and it must be exactly that, no capitalizations. So those are some of the things to look back if you are having issues with this. If you have gaps in your data, those will be interpolated. So it can take in some messy data, but just be aware if you have a month-long gap, it will just be an interpolated value. So that can be convenient, but just keep that in mind. So for this example, I'm going to show again the upload with that same Consumnes River data I just downloaded online. So let's open this and take a look. Okay. So here it is. We have those headers, date, and flow. I know that flow is in CFS because that's how I downloaded it. You'll see that the date is appearing in this 2-year date format, which for some reason when I open CSVs on Mac, it just does this. So when I upload data to the website, I have to go in and make sure that I save it again with the correct format. So I'll just show really quick how we can go in and do that. Go to dates, then I find the 4-digit year format down here. And there it goes. And just to be extra safe, I'm going to save as, make sure it's a CSV. I'll just overwrite the file on my desktop. Replace. Okay, now the data is all ready to go. So we'll come back here onto the website. Just choose your file. And everything is Consumnes, so I'll just call it Consumnes January 28th. There's a parameters option. I'm going to skip that for now and show it again in just a minute. But for now, we'll just upload the data as is with the default parameters of the FFC. Okay, maybe I need to refresh. It should show up here in this little box. Let's see, let me try it one more time. It's possible the name I gave it had a special character. So let's do an underscore 128 and try that. And you'll notice I've kept the default water year. It's 10-1, just
A little error down there, so it could not process data.
okay. Well, that's the first time that's happened for me so far, but thankfully I have the Consumnes data that I used yesterday, so I'll just open that. If you have issues like that, I'll show you where you can contact our developer for the website, or again, check your extension, your date headers. For now, I'll save you those details and just go straight to this Consumnes example that I downloaded or uploaded yesterday. So when you put in data, this download option gives you 3 different files that you can work with. The first one is this annual flow matrix. And so this is just the flow data that you entered, but it's split up by water year. So each of these columns is either going to be 365 or 366 days of flow. And so that can just make it convenient for plotting out with a given water year as your start date. Let's see, let's try to take that one off. There's also the dimensionless reference hydrograph. So someone asked about that following my last presentation. And so this gives you the data all laid out in the dimensionless reference hydrograph format. So it compresses all of that data into this one annual pattern. And so then you can just go and plot it up in Excel. Oh, insert. I'll just show a really quick example with this. So this is our median data for this given gauge. You can add more lines on there if you want. And again, if you have questions about what the dimensionless reference hydrograph is and how it's calculated, you can go into that website documentation. No. Okay, finally, there's a flow result file. And what this gives us is the calculations of the flow metrics for every water year in your data. And so this is where the online capabilities are getting very powerful. So for the data that I put in, which goes from 1950 until 2017, we have the metrics from the functional flow calculator calculated for each of these years. And so then you could go in and take percentiles or the average, analyze this data in whichever way you want. And if you have questions on what these variable names mean, we also have a README you can download. And this just gives a brief description of each of the metrics that are on that CSV. And then you can also look on the website for even more detailed description of these metrics. But this gives it to you in the same format as the downloaded CSV. Okay, and then to the visualization capabilities of the website, I can now click on the name of this uploaded data, and this dimensionless reference hydrograph is calculated from your inputted data. So this is just from the Consumnes River that I just downloaded from USGS. Yeah, and if you wanted to know how your data compares to other reference data from our 223 reference gauges, you can now overlay data from the class DRHs against your gauge. And so then you can kind of see which of the 9 hydrologic classes your data fits in just by looking at this overlay is a good first pass guess. And so you see class 3, which is low volume snowmelt and rain, corresponds pretty closely with the Consumnes River. We can take off a couple of these outside lines so it's a little easier to see. We can look at one more maybe. Winter storms class also looks somewhat similar. So maybe the Consumnes River is somewhere between low volume snowmelt and rain and winter storms. So this feature was added just about a week ago to the website. So I'm really excited I can show it to you here. We can do this overlay with individual gauges as well. And so I was just thinking of different reference gauges in our California streamflow data. Let's see. I don't think it took that one yet. Let me try another one. There it is. Okay, yeah. I had tried this with the Feather River earlier, kind of giving a guess, and you can see that the general flow pattern of the Feather River somewhat aligns with the Consumnes River. So now you can do this and see how your data aligns with either individual gauges from our reference streamflow data set or entire classes of reference streamflow data. Okay, the next feature for visualization are the annual flow plots. So this is just the data that I showed on the CSV download. You could plot this out year by year, but the additional feature we have is metric overlays. So for the data that you put in the website, did the calculation of all the metrics, and on the fly will show them for your data. And so here I turned on all the timing metrics The orange is the wet season initiation. The yellow is the start of the wet season. The green is the spring recession, and the red is the dry season. So you can go through and look at your years one by one, see how the FFC did in calculating these metrics, and then you can decide from there if you wanted to adjust any parameters and see how that changes your outputs. I usually use timing as the example for this because the timing metrics of the 4 functional flow components sort of drive the other calculations. For example, the timing of the spring recession will directly inform the magnitude on the day of the spring recession. But you can, of course, also overlay the other metrics. Here's the magnitude of the dry season, for example, the base flow of the wet season. We have, that one's too high to see. There it is. There, it's high flow magnitude. So those only show up in the years that have high enough flow to show those. But let's go back to the timing metrics. And ahead of time, I just looked through and saw how these performed. And it was overall pretty good. But there's a year in here, 1955. And so, for example, you might see that the spring recession in this year looks like it was calculated a bit early before the entire recession has occurred. And so this might happen if you have a gauge that you put in data for and it doesn't follow the same patterns as our reference data, and so you want to adjust these parameters. And so we can now go in and try again uploading this data and modifying the parameters to see if we can get that spring recession to calculate a little more the way that we want it to for our analysis purposes. So I'm going to close this, go back to my profile page, and I'll try uploading the data and adjusting the parameters. If I get the error again, I have this example where I did it yesterday, so we have a way to do it either way. But let's go in, pull up our consumnus data.
So the header is also formatted. That may have.
Hey, Noel, while you're talking about the parameters, could you just take a moment for those people who aren't familiar and talk about just the general time series filtering technique that we're applying, which is why it's maybe been a little vague in how exactly some of these metrics are calculated, and why we have this need for being able to look annually and understand exactly where those timing metrics are falling?
Sure, yeah. So that's some of the background that we covered in some previous presentations. And so if you weren't there for those, I'll just give the couple-minute overview of that. And I'm going to our documentation pages to show some of this. And what Belle is referring to are the steps that we use to calculate where exactly these timing metrics should occur in a given water year. And so let's look really quickly. Let's see, I'll have to go back to just a given water year. See, this might not be a very good example if the data's, well, that's okay. So for a given water year like this, we're using what we call signal processing methods to identify where these timing components should occur. And so it's things that are pretty intuitive when you just look at it. You see where there's a first spike in the flow in an annual water year. That's what we're considering the initiation of the wet season, this first flow. And so we use techniques to identify this flow. One of those is constraining the range of time that we look within to see it. And so, for example, that's a parameter. As a group, we decided that we should only look for this wet season initiation flow within the first 75 days of the water year. That's until about December 15th. And that's a parameter that you can change on your own if you want to constrain it even more so that you're only looking for flows within the first 30 days of your water year. or you want to extend it to the first 3 months of your water year. So that's one example where we window off the data to only look at particular parts of it. Another thing we do is smoothing the data. So we apply a smoothing filter, and instead of only analyzing this kind of choppy, raw stream flow, we're applying this filter so you get more of a smooth curve, and then we can just use techniques to identify the start and end of a smooth curve. I'll actually show some visualizations of this when we get into the code, but suffice it to say you can change the amount of smoothing. You can smooth it a lot so you only get one peak in a water year, or smooth it a little bit so you get maybe 3 or 4 primary peaks of flow in a water year. Things like that. For example, with the dry season calculation, we want to assign the dry season when the rate of change of flow has decreased substantially, so that we're at that stable period where flow is low and not changing much. And there's a parameter where you can change how much that rate of change has to decrease before you set the dry season timing parameter. So that's the whirlwind overview of how we calculate these metrics.
Thanks,
we have a lot more. Yeah.
That's really helpful. And so just to give you guys a little follow-up, we're working on the publication for that, which will have all of the details, but we're happy to discuss it with you more, especially if you have a particular metric that you just want to make sure you're totally understanding.
Yeah, exactly. We could go on for hours talking about this with you if you wanted, but a good place to start if you're curious about individual metrics is in our documentation pages, the basic documentation, and then this more advanced documentation. And then, of course, reaching out to us with your specific questions. So let's go back with that sort of overview of how we can use these parameters to change what we're calculating. So I'm going to, where was I? I need to choose the file. We're choosing the consumnus one again. Consum example 2. And here's where we can start changing parameters. And this is the first example I'll show of changing parameters. I'll show it one more time. So if it doesn't make perfect sense this first time, I'll show it again. But I showed the spring recession, and we want to adjust where the spring recession was being calculated in that water year 1955. And so all of the parameters we have a short description. For example, I talked about the smoothing, and so those are usually called, let's see, I'm looking for a smoothing parameter. The names of these actually just changed. Smoothing filter, here it is. So we give a recommended value, and these parameters, like I said, change the amount of smoothing we apply to a stream flow water year before we adjust the calculations. And so going back into spring recession, we have several different metric or parameters that we can tune. But first I'll give a little more background on these calculations. So for calculating the spring timing, we bring in raw flow data. For all of our timing calculations, we apply a limit of 0 flow data or NA flow data, so like gaps in the data. And if there's too many gaps, we won't calculate it because it probably won't be an accurate representation. Here's where we apply the filters. They're called Gaussian filters to smooth the data. And so this window sigma, for example, that is one of our parameters, and that determines how much smoothing we apply to the time series data. And then using that smoothed data, we find the peaks and valleys in the smoothed or filtered data.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're looking for the last peak event in a water year. And we know that the spring recession should calculate sometime around this time. I can show, just to give that a little more context, I'll actually get out of this page and show in the consumness with our spring timing. So it's possible that the smoothing we applied might have been too small of a smoothing filter. Maybe it only identified this single peak is the only important one in the flow data. So one thing I can try is just increasing that amount of smoothing so it sees this entire flow period as the significant flow event of the water year. Then we'll keep looking. I talked about constraining analyses to windows of time. So the default search window we have is 20 days before and 50 days after an identified peak event. So looking back at here, if this green line was where we identified the last major flow, it'd look 20 days before and 50 days after and say spring recession should occur within there. And so maybe since it's setting it too early, I can reduce that search window on the left side. So it's 20 days. I can go and change that to maybe 5 days, just for our example. Then here, essentially what we're doing is finding the rate of change of the flow data, of the smoothed flow data. And this lets us find little peaks in the flow. And it's enough to say that with those peaks, one of those is going to be set as the spring timing. And we have a flow requirement, a flow magnitude requirement, where the flow must be 50% of the highest peak flow in that water year. So you see back in here, maybe if one of these peaks could have been assigned as the spring recession, but it didn't reach that flow magnitude of 50% of this peak. So then we can reduce that magnitude requirement maybe from 50% down to just 10% for our example here. So that's enough that I'll show you just through here, but this is showing you that process you can walk through. You see that some timing is not being calculated correctly. Go through the steps and see where you might be able to adjust things, sort of your tuning knobs, to calculate them more according to what you expect for your analysis.
And just one thing to add, so the way those parameters were calibrated, we have essentially one set of parameter values that works for almost every water year in all of the reference hydrographs throughout California. So it's quite a robust algorithm as is. So our hope is that you will not have to deal with these parameter adjustments as much as possible, but we also want you to have the transparency and flexibility to adjust them to get the best values you can and understand those tools. But again, our hope is to minimize that, that part of this process.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. Yeah, so we've already done a lot of that troubleshooting already of investigating and then tuning parameters. So for California stream flow, this tool already works pretty well. We expect maybe the finer tuned your analysis is, the more likely it is that you would want to go in and adjust these parameters.
Could you clarify, is that a set for each of the
For
9
each.
classes?
That's a great question.
Statewide,
Yeah.
one set that works.
If you didn't hear on the line, the question was, are these parameters adjusted specifically for the 9 stream classes, or are they statewide? And the answer is, we try to make them statewide applicable as much as possible. And so in that case, sometimes finding the best middle ground between different flow regimes. But in the cases where it really became necessary to differentiate, for example, between snowmelt-driven flow regimes and flashy rainfall flow, we do have some cases where we make it class-specific. So we tried to avoid it as much as possible, but there are some cases where we needed that. Yeah, that's a great question. Okay, as Belle was talking, I was checking my file format one more time just to be sure. So I open this, consum example 2, and now we're looking at the parameters with that background I just gave us. So here in the spring recession, there's this search window. So this is the one where I said maybe we can ramp that down to 5 days, for example. So we'll tune that one. We can keep the right search window as 50 days. Here's the relative flow threshold. This was the one where it looked like maybe that magnitude threshold was too high. So let's change that from 50% just down to 10% to see what happens. And this one, here it is. This is the smoothing filter used to find the general location of the spring recession. And so this is where I recommended, let's just try increasing it and see what happens. And you'll see I've put recommended values for each of these. So if you're exploring this for the first time, maybe stay within those. But if you're just experimenting, go ahead and change it as much as you want. So let's save that, then upload. Could not process data. How embarrassing. Good thing I already did it with this consumness example here. So we'll just open this one. And so this is where I went in yesterday, changed those same parameters. It's possible, since I've uploaded consumness data like 15 times since yesterday, that there's an issue now, but generally you shouldn't have a problem when you're uploading your own data. But let's look in at the annual flow plot and see how the spring recession timing has changed. And I was looking specifically at this 1955 date. So in that first year, the spring recession was occurring right after this large peak. Through changing the parameters, we have bumped it a little more to the right. So maybe we're happy with that. Maybe you would want to go in and change parameters even more. But this is just a first pass example showing how you can explore with these. And I can go back one more time and show you the before and after. So this is our after data. Here, I'll show the spring recession. This is our before, so it's substantially earlier in the water year. And there are sometimes unintended consequences. You'll see in this first water year, the spring recession was way out here, which may or may not be what you wanted. But when I started changing parameters, even though I didn't have my eye on that one at the beginning, you can see it's now way earlier over here. So there is a lot of iterative work you need to do when you're modifying these parameters. Like Belle said, the more you can use the default ones, which have already been tuned extensively, that will probably make your work more seamless. But if you do have a really specific example where you want to get things exactly as you need, then we do have that capability now on the website. I can take any questions you have about that now, but if not, I was going to continue on and show how you can do some of the same things and then even more by going into the code on the website. Okay, so moving on, I see it's already 10:46. I'll be as quick as possible with this part and just blaze through. You can always ask me more questions. So this is just giving you the exposure to going into the code. The way that I recommend downloading and using the code is through what's called the Anaconda distribution for Python. What this gives you is what I call a one-stop shop for all your Python needs. It gives you a developer environment and the Python code. So it just kind of makes things easier for you if you're not already a developer with all your favorite tools on hand. So you would need to download Python 3, the most recent version. I've already done that, so I'll just open it up where I have it. And I'm not even going to go into these developer-friendly installation instructions yet. Okay, that's the next step, but for now I'll open Anaconda. It's opening, so it gives you a lot of tools, and the only one that we'll be using is what's called Spider. This is the Python development environment. And it comes with some pre-installed packages that give you scientific tools within Python. So it just makes things as easy as possible. So here we are with Spider open and ready to use. So now we just need to put the FFC code into it. And that's where I have this link. Let's go to GitHub. GitHub was one of those first 4 resource links I showed. And GitHub is a place to store code. Oh, let's try reloading it. If I can't show it to you, that's a shame, but you can go even right now on your own computer and go to GitHub and see where the code is stored. There's just a big green download zip file button on the website. If I can't get it now, just off.
Oh no.
Oh no. Are you still with me on the phone?
Yes, we are.
Yes?
I can see you.
Yep.
Okay. So I might be having some trouble with the Cali PA Wi-Fi, but good thing I already downloaded the code. So let's check in my downloads. Okay. I'm just going to pull out this zipped file and bring it to my documents. Suffice it to say, you want to download the code off of the website GitHub, store it in a safe place, and then you can start using it. So here it is. This is the whole folder of code files that you would download from GitHub. And they're all arranged either separate code files or in folders. So now we're going to bring this whole thing into Spider. So we go to projects, we'll open a project, and now where I just put it in documents, FuncFlow. And if it doesn't work like that, we might need to make a new project. Let's go to documents. Try this one more time. There we go. Okay, so now our code is in Spider. You can see all of these folders that were in my navigation system are now here. If you don't see those, you want to go to View, Panes, and show your File Explorer here. And so to run the code on your personal machine using Python, you need to find what we call main.py. So this is the main file that initiates all the other code. And to run it in Python, you just press this big green play button. So you make sure that you're open to main.py, that's main.python. And here, this is the console. This is where you get outputs from the code. And it gives you several prompts to choose from. For almost all of the work I do in here, I go to this number 7, which will give you the flow matrix CSV, and this calculates all of the functional flow metric calculations. So I press 7, enter. We want the default water year. You can see this is kind of like the website now because the website is a representation of this. And we have within here all of the reference streamflow data. So I'm just going to use one of those for now. I could press 3 and it'll take maybe 25 minutes to calculate all 223 gauges, but I'm going to click 2, which is calculating individual gauges. We have a default one, so you can just press enter. And so this will calculate the same sort of files that we tried on the website. Just give some warnings, but here you can see it's done. And those files are available here. They're in what's called post-processed files. We can see that this was a gauge in class 1. So we'd look in here. I find it easier actually to just go within my own navigation system, because then I can just open the CSVs in Excel. Let's process files. Okay, so here it is. And this should look familiar because this is the exact same output that you get from the website. So far what I've showed you is what you can do on the website, but there is more that you can do. And to do that, first I'll put in some Consumnes River data, and then I'll show how you can visualize the smoothing functions and the metrics on, so that's where we'll get a little more advanced with the code. So one of the options here is to upload files. I actually need to go in and do that before I run this. Copy over. Are you still with me, guys? My connection's unstable. But here we're going to go into user files. Just paste this in. I know it's in the right format because I formatted it for the website just before this. Okay, I'm gonna actually get out of that. Try this one more time. So 9, now we're uploading our own files. We only have one to choose from, and that's Consumnes. Start date here. Okay, and so now in the user output files, documents, now we have all of those CSV files that I opened previously. So far that's still the same, but I'm going to dig into it a little more now, so just hold on to your hats. It's a lot to go through right now, but there's a couple files that we'll check out. Params, which is where the parameters are stored in the Python code. And in the utils folder, this is our utilities. This is where we calculate our functional flow metrics. So just going really quick, I will show params. So these are familiar again. The website is representing all of these parameters that are from the code. And I'm going to open utils or utilities. And the example I was going to show is calculating fall flush. And so to make this an even more powerful tool, I'm going to open the plotting function on here. And the way I'm going to do this is there's some code that's been commented out, like this gray line. And I'm going to find where I've commented out plotting functions and activate all of those so that we can calculate and plot our functional flow metrics. So I'm going to just put plot in here and search this file. It'll show all the places where we have plotting in here. So I'm going to take out that hashtag and that activates it. I know that this is for the wet season, so I'm not going to open that one up. Oh, here it is. And comment this all at once. It should be command. There it is, command 1. It sometimes depends on what code environment you're in, but if there's a little indentation problem, it'll throw you a warning. So in this case, I just have to go down and backspace these. It's a bit inconvenient, but these are the sorts of things that come up when you're in a developer environment and maybe will differ based on what sort of code application you're using. But anyway, that looks like it should work now. I am scanning through, see if there's anything I missed. Okay, we have an undefined variable name. I'm going to solve this by simply removing that variable, let's just say we don't need it, and make sure that I don't call for it down here. I know this is a lot to go over at one time, but again, you can just watch this tutorial over again, and then of course ask me if you have any questions. So let's save that and just see what happens when we run it. So I go back to main.py. I'm still going to use my consumness data. And what this should do is open up plots for me if I don't have a warning. Oh, good. Okay. So you see there's all of this extra stuff now in the plot. There's different things that I've chosen to keep visible that you don't see when you're using the website application. So we identified little peaks in the data with these triangles. Let's say I don't want to look at those now. I'll just hide them like that. Filter data. So this was one of the parameters that we tuned, and it's this orange line over our raw flow data. So this is giving you that visualization. This is what I mean when I say smoothing the data. It literally looks like a smooth line. Our raw flow data is in these blue dots, but I'm actually going to change it to a line because I think that's a little easier to look at. And the start date, this is the start date for the wet season initiation, is this blue line. So I've just made some adjustments, and you'll see that one more, this red line, this horizontal one is right here. This is the minimum flush magnitude. So in this particular parameter, this is the wet season initiation, what we used to call the fall flush. There's another magnitude requirement similar to the spring recession one. I can look at my parameters, and since I've already studied this a lot, I know that we're looking at the flush threshold. It's 1 now, but this is a really high flow sort of gauge, so let's just change it to 100. And so I'm changing parameters. I'm also changing the visualizations and the plots. And so I can run this again and just see what happens. Okay, it's going to produce a ton of plots. See, it's a little easier to look at now that I've taken out those little peaks showing the triangles, and I made the raw flow data this blue line. And so you see how the smoothing works. This red line is still at 100 CFS. And so this little peak here has been marked as the wet season initiation. But let's say I want it to be this line instead. You can look in the documentation and see what parameters you would need to change to do that. But I already know we have this timing window that's set at 75 days. But let's make it about 120 days so I can capture this peak. And I can also increase the flow magnitude requirement threshold, that's this red horizontal line, so that this little peak that's caught here wouldn't be high enough to be considered a flush. So that's the last example I'll show. I already went in and tried this out, and I know I need to make this flush threshold pretty high. Here's the date cutoff at 75. I'll just change it to 120. Save that. Go back in here and run this one more time, and you'll see how this changes the outputs we get from the FFC.
Well, as you were seeing in the parameters, I mean, some of those are actually the scroll bars that you have on the...
Exactly, yeah. So the scroll bars with the parameters on the website are a representation of these parameters that are actually in the code. So now you can see how that's changed things. This red horizontal line is now at 1500 CFS. So if you want to only know the wet season initiation for really high flows and allow it to search later in the code, that's how we can identify this as the wet season initiation instead of this tiny peak here at the beginning. So that was the example I wanted to run through on the code. As you can see, a lot of this you can do through the website, but if you really wanted to get more detailed, there is some extra functionality that going into the code allows you to accomplish. So I think I managed to cover what I had planned to show. The last thing I want to show before opening it up to questions is just the workflow I would recommend for where to get help. That would first be to check the documentation. We have the general website documentation, as well as our more detailed metrics and metric calculations documentation. And if you have any issues on the website, you can either contact us directly or go down to the bottom of the page. There's this bug report tab. Just put in your name, email, and a message. And I'll give one shout out on the team to Leo Chu. That's our software engineer who created this entire website and is the one adding all these extra features. So the bug report emails will go directly to him, so you could just email him here too. But we've been working closely with him on what the features are that we want to see on the website, what we believe will help us and users the most. So you can have that conversation with him too, even if there's really particular needs that the website could help you with in your project.
And also take a look at this video, or watch again this video, so you can just see how we were changing parameters.
Yeah,
and so on.
That's excellent suggestion, Sam. You can also rewatch this tutorial video. I have a previous tutorial video that
and
both show.
They'll be made available through the California Environmental Flows Framework website, which I think is at cef.ucdavis.edu.
And also through the Water Quality Monitoring Council website. So we'll have it posted in different places.
Yeah, so here it is, California Environmental Flows Framework website. Here's the Under the Hood webinar that I gave in November. This will just be on top of that as another presentation with more features. We have the technical overview that covers more of the fundamentals of the functional flows, and so why we're calculating these metrics. So there's resources abounding online. You can also email me directly with any questions you have, and I'll be happy to work with you on it.
And just before we close up this one, I also would like to congratulate Noel, Belize. Noel was informed that she won an award for AGU for her poster presentation. She was on the top 5%. So anyways, I would like to publicly congratulate Noel.
Thank you, Sam.
Belize also. Belize has been working quite a lot on this, and I think also the mastermind and the vision for a lot of this has come with Belle, Noel, and Leo. And we've been tagging along, and with that I will, and the fire truck coming along. Any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Sam. So yeah, any questions on features of the website or code or the components that we can just answer right now?
I don't have any specific questions, but just wanted to thank you all for putting together such a great presentation.
Thank you so much. We're really glad to be able to share this with the interested users out there. So yeah, I hope you continue to use it. Let us know if you have questions.
Thanks.
Going once, going twice? Okay, I think that's a wrap.
Yeah, please send us any comments or and start using the application. And as you're using it, I'm pretty sure that you're going to find some bugs or some questions to send us along.
And even if you don't, please do let us know if you're using it and what for, just because it helps us continue to improve this project. So we
absolutely
really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Also, this wouldn't have been possible without all the support here from the water boards and the people that we've been working. I think this has been an iterative process. So thank you all for brainstorming all these ideas.
Okay, thank you. Take care,
All right,
everyone.
thank you very much.
Everyone, thanks a lot.
Bye.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.